It was a calm morning in the city, the kind where the sunlight seemed to fall gently over the streets and the sound of life hummed quietly in the background. In a tall, glass-covered building downtown, the billionaire sat alone in a room filled with expensive furniture and paintings that told stories of wealth and luxury. Despite all of it, the billionaire often felt a strange emptiness, a sense that something important was missing from life. Money had brought comfort, but it hadn't brought connection or purpose. Far away, in a different part of the city, 5 boys were living lives that couldn't be more different. They knew struggle in a way that many could not imagine. Their neighborhoods were filled with noise, uncertainty, and sometimes danger. Families were scattered, and support was hard to come by. Yet despite everything, the boys had something rare, an unbreakable bond with each other. They had grown up together, learning to look out for one another, sharing laughter even when life seemed unfair, and dreaming about a future that always felt just out of reach. On that particular morning, the boys found themselves in trouble, though it wasn't the kind of trouble that could get them arrested. It was the kind of trouble that came from being young and poor in a world that often ignored them. They were trying to help a neighbor, moving boxes for an elderly woman who could not lift them on her own, when a few people from the street started shouting and throwing insults. The boys held their ground, defending themselves and their neighbor, showing courage and loyalty in a way that surprised even themselves. The billionaire, who often walked the streets quietly to observe life outside the walls of wealth, happened to be passing by. Curiosity had drawn them out that morning, as if some invisible pull had led them to this very street. They stopped when they saw the scene, 5 boys standing firm, faces set with determination, while others tried to intimidate them. The billionaire didn't hesitate. They approached calmly, speaking in a voice that was steady but gentle. "Leave them alone," the billionaire said. There was no anger, only calm authority. The boys looked at each other, unsure if this stranger was serious. The people causing trouble backed away, surprised by the sudden intervention. The boys were stunned as well. They had never seen someone just step in like that, without shouting or trying to prove themselves. After the incident, the billionaire stayed with the boys, talking to them, asking questions about their lives, their families, and their dreams. The boys were hesitant at first, unsure if they could trust anyone, especially someone so clearly wealthy. They had learned the hard way that people often said nice things but did little to help. Yet there was something different about this person. There was no judgment, no pity, only interest and kindness. As they spoke, the billionaire learned about their struggles, about homes that weren't always safe, about schools that didn't always care, and about dreams that often felt impossible. The billionaire listened closely, genuinely absorbing every word. Something inside shifted. In that moment, a decision formed, almost spontaneously, almost without thinking. "I want to help," the billionaire said quietly. The words hung in the air and the boys exchanged doubtful glances. One of them, the quiet one, finally spoke. "Help? How?" The billionaire smiled. "Come with me. For a while. You'll see." It took a long moment for the boys to respond. They looked around at each other, at the street they knew so well, at the neighborhood that had shaped them. It was hard to believe that anyone would offer a real chance like this. None of them had ever had such an opportunity. Skepticism battled with hope, but eventually they nodded. Something in the billionaire's eyes, the calm and unwavering gaze, told them it was real. The ride to the billionaire's mansion was quiet. The boys didn't know what to say. They had seen wealth before, but not like this. The building rose above them like a castle, sleek and shining, its walls reflecting the morning sun. The doors opened automatically as they approached, welcoming them into a world they had never imagined. Inside, the mansion was vast. Rooms stretched in every direction, filled with furniture that seemed to have stories of its own. Paintings hung on walls, each one expensive and unique. There was a library with shelves that reached the ceiling, a kitchen stocked with every imaginable ingredient, and a garden that looked more like a park. The boys' eyes widened with awe, but there was also a hesitation. It was all so different from the life they had known that it almost felt unreal. The billionaire walked with them through the rooms, showing them around without rushing, allowing them to absorb everything. They explained that this would be their home for now, that they were safe and that they would be treated like family. The boys were still unsure. They had learned to survive in difficult circumstances, and the idea of someone simply offering care and stability seemed strange. almost too good to be true. For the first few hours, the boys explored cautiously. They tried the beds, tested the bathrooms, and even peeked into the library, amazed by the rows of books. They laughed quietly to themselves, sharing looks that said, "Can you believe this?" But behind the laughter, there was a lingering doubt. Could it really last? Would someone really care for them without expecting something in return? The billionaire noticed their hesitation and didn't push. Instead, they shared a little about their own life. Not about wealth, but about loneliness, about wanting to make a difference, about realizing that true happiness came from helping others. It was not a lecture, just a story, told in simple words that made the boys feel like they were being seen, not judged. As evening approached, the boys gathered in the dining room for the first time. A meal had been prepared, but it was not fancy or intimidating. It was simple, wholesome, and made with care. They sat together, talking cautiously, learning small things about each other and about the billionaire. The quiet one finally smiled. The mischievous one made a small joke. And for the first time in a long while, the boys felt a sense of normalcy. That night, as they settled into beds they had never dreamed of sleeping in, the billionaire checked on them one by one. There was a promise in their eyes, a silent assurance that this was real, that the boys were safe and that things could change. The boys, despite their doubts, began to feel a small spark of hope, a feeling they had not allowed themselves to feel in a long time. The news of the billionaire taking in 5 boys spread quickly through the neighborhood. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers were shocked. Some were skeptical, thinking it was a publicity stunt. Others were amazed and hopeful, inspired by the idea that someone would reach out without expecting anything in return. Meanwhile, the boys tried to process everything themselves. They knew life could change in an instant, but they also knew that this moment, this opportunity, might be the one that set the course for everything that came next. By the end of the first night, the mansion was quiet except for the soft sounds of the boys sleeping. The billionaire sat alone in the living room reflecting on the day. There was no grand plan, no expectation of reward, only the simple, powerful feeling that something good had begun. Somewhere in the quiet corners of that grand house, 5 boys were dreaming for the first time about a life where possibilities were endless. And somewhere in that same house, a billionaire felt the first real sense of purpose in years. It was a beginning, fragile and uncertain but full of promise. Life had just shifted, and although neither the boys nor the billionaire could see what the future held, they both sensed that it was going to be extraordinary. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the mansion, filling every room with a golden glow. The boys woke up slowly, still adjusting to the softness of the beds and the quiet of the house. For the first time in their lives, they didn't wake up to sirens shouting or the constant noise of the streets. Instead, there was calm, and it felt strange, almost unreal. Breakfast was waiting for them in the kitchen, a table filled with simple, nourishing food. There were eggs, fruit toast, and warm drinks. The boys had never experienced a meal like this before, not because it was fancy, but because it was prepared just for them. They sat cautiously, unsure if they were allowed to touch everything, still carrying the habits of survival from their old lives. The billionaire watched them quietly, letting them get comfortable in their own time. After breakfast, the billionaire suggested they take a tour of the mansion's library and study rooms. The boys followed slowly, eyes wide as they looked at the walls lined with books, computers, and art supplies. It was a place where learning wasn't forced or boring, it was inviting. Some of the boys were curious, running their fingers along the spines of books while others hesitated, unsure if this was really meant for them. One boy, the quiet and observant one, found a notebook filled with sketches of the mansion and its surroundings. He opened it carefully, and a smile appeared on his face as he studied the drawings. The billionaire noticed and said, "You like to draw?" The boy nodded, a little shy, and the billionaire added, "Then you should draw what you see. No one will judge it. This is your space too." That small encouragement sparked something in the boy. For the first time, he felt that his talent mattered. The mischievous boy, who had been fidgeting and making jokes, wandered toward the music room. There were drums, guitars, and keyboards all waiting to be played. The boy picked up a drumstick and tapped a rhythm on the drums, hesitant at first but soon laughing as he discovered the sounds he could make. The billionaire clapped gently, showing approval, not criticism. The day continued with small lessons, not academic in the traditional sense, but life lessons. The boys learned about responsibility, teamwork, and respect. The billionaire was patient, guiding them through small tasks, cleaning their rooms, organizing the study area, and preparing simple meals. At first, the boys resisted, some joking about how they didn't want to follow rules. Others were quiet, unsure how to respond. But slowly they began to understand that rules here weren't punishment. They were a way to create a safe and comfortable space for everyone. Outside, the garden was vast and inviting. The boys had never seen grass that stretched so far, or trees that felt so old and strong. The billionaire suggested they play a game of soccer. At first they were hesitant, not used to such open space. But soon they were running, laughing and competing, forgetting for a moment the weight of their previous lives. The game wasn't about winning or losing. It was about freedom, joy, and learning to trust each other in a new environment. As the afternoon approached, the boys started to settle into a routine. One by one, they began exploring hobbies they had never had the chance to try. The artistic boy painted a small canvas, inspired by the sunlight streaming through the windows. The curious boy started experimenting with a chemistry kit in the study, amazed at how experiments could create sparks and bubbles. Even the mischievous boy began to focus, building something with blocks and wood, learning patience as he concentrated on making it perfect. Despite all the fun and learning, tension still lingered beneath the surface. The boys had grown up in a world where trust was fragile. They wondered if this care and kindness would last. They worried about being sent back, about losing the comfort and safety they had found. At night, some whispered among themselves, sharing fears they had not spoken aloud in years. The billionaire knew this and didn't try to rush them. Instead, they shared small stories of their own childhood struggles, moments when they had doubted themselves or felt alone. The stories weren't about wealth or success, they were about human experience. And the boys listened carefully, feeling a connection slowly forming. One evening, the boys gathered in the dining room for another meal. Conversation flowed more naturally this time. The quiet boy shared a sketch he had made of the garden. The mischievous boy made everyone laugh with a story from his neighborhood. The artistic boy showed a small painting of the library, and the curious boy explained an experiment he had tried earlier in the day. The billionaire listened, smiling, nodding, and asking questions. It was the first meal where everyone truly felt comfortable, where laughter and learning existed side by side. Even the media had started noticing. Local news outlets caught wind of the story, a billionaire taking in 5 boys from challenging circumstances. Some reported it with skepticism, assuming a hidden motive. Others were inspired, praising the billionaire's generosity. The boys, however, didn't pay much attention. They were too busy adjusting to a life that felt almost like a dream, trying to believe that this kindness could be real. As days passed, small victories began to show. The quiet boy read a few pages of a book aloud without stumbling. The mischievous boy played a song on the drums without giving up halfway. The artistic boy painted a larger canvas, proud of what he had accomplished. The curious boy successfully completed a simple science experiment. These achievements were small, but they mattered. Each boy began to see that they could accomplish more than they ever imagined, that they could grow, learn, and succeed when given support and guidance. The billionaire continued to observe, quietly encouraging growth. They noticed that the boys were slowly starting to care for the mansion as if it were their own. They helped with chores, cleaned up after activities, and even suggested improvements to their rooms or study areas. The mansion was no longer just a place of luxury. It was becoming a home, a space filled with life, laughter, and shared effort. Yet not everything was easy. Conflicts arose. Sometimes the boys disagreed with each other, fighting over small things like who got to use the drums first or how to organize the library. At other times, frustration showed in moments of rebellion, when one boy didn't want to follow instructions or when another felt left out. The billionaire handled these moments with care, never raising their voice but guiding the boys through their emotions, helping them understand empathy, compromise, and communication. One afternoon, the billionaire suggested a walk in the city. The boys had never explored this part of the city together, and they were curious. The streets were alive with people, sounds, and colors. The boys pointed out familiar things from their neighborhoods, but also discovered new places, shops, and parks they had never seen. The billionaire listened as they shared stories of their lives, their dreams, and their fears. It was a moment of connection, a bridge between the world they had known and the new world opening before them. By the end of the week, the boys had started to feel a sense of belonging. They were no longer just visitors in a mansion. They were part of a new family, learning, laughing, and growing together. The billionaire watched this transformation quietly, knowing that change didn't happen overnight but feeling hopeful. The boys had shown courage, resilience, and a willingness to try something new, and that was a victory in itself. That night, as the boys lay in their beds, they reflected on the week. They had experienced more in a few days than they had in years: kindness, safety, opportunity, and hope. They realized that life could be different, that they could be more than their circumstances, and that someone had truly believed in them. Sleep came easier that night, filled with dreams of possibilities and adventures yet to come. Outside, the billionaire stood by the window, looking at the city lights. They thought about the journey ahead, the challenges the boys would face, and the growth yet to come. There were no guarantees, no certainty of the future, but there was hope, and that was enough. Hope, after all, was the first step toward change, and so, the mansion was no longer just a house of wealth. It was becoming a home of transformation, where 5 boys had begun a journey that could change their lives forever. The days ahead promised lessons, challenges, and growth, but also laughter, friendship, and the rare magic that happens when trust is given and hearts are opened. The days began to blend together in the mansion, but not in a boring way. Each morning brought new challenges, small discoveries, and moments of laughter. The boys were no longer strangers to the house. It was slowly becoming a place where they felt safe, where they could try new things without fear of failure or judgment. But trust, as always, was something that had to be earned, and the billionaire knew that patience would be key. One morning, the billionaire suggested an art project. They set up a table in the sunroom where sunlight poured over the boys as they worked. The quiet boy hesitated at first, unsure if his drawings were good enough. The artistic boy was immediately absorbed in his painting, colors flying across the canvas. The mischievous boy tried to join in but ended up spilling paint, which made everyone laugh. The curious boy asked questions about techniques, fascinated by the process, while the athletic boy, who usually preferred sports, decided to try painting too. Carefully blending colors, the billionaire moved among them, encouraging, guiding, but never forcing. Mistakes are part of learning, they said, smiling. No one's work has to be perfect. Slowly, the boys began to feel comfortable expressing themselves. By the end of the morning, the sunroom was filled with bright paintings, sketches, and laughter. The boys realized that creativity wasn't just for fun. It was a way to show who they were, a chance to be seen for themselves. After lunch, the billionaire decided it was time for a different kind of learning. They brought the boys to the mansion's study, where there were computers, books, and educational games. Some of the boys were hesitant. They had struggled in school and feared failure. The billionaire didn't push. Instead, they asked what each boy liked and wanted to explore. The quiet boy chose to read about space, fascinated by stars and planets. The mischievous boy, surprisingly, chose a computer game that taught strategy and problem-solving. The artistic boy explored art history, the curious boy read about science experiments, and the athletic boy found a program about sports training and teamwork. It was the first time the boys realized that learning could be fun, that it didn't have to feel like punishment. The billionaire watched with satisfaction, seeing confidence slowly grow in their eyes. Small victories began to appear. The quiet boy answered questions aloud without hesitation. The mischievous boy completed a strategy game successfully, and the others proudly shared what they had learned. It was not about grades or awards. It was about believing in themselves. But it wasn't all smooth. Tensions arose naturally, as they always did when people adjusted to new circumstances. The boys sometimes argued over who got to use what first, or who was spending too much time in one room. The mischievous boy teased the quiet one, trying to provoke a reaction, and the quiet boy resisted, holding back words he wanted to say. The billionaire handled these moments with calm guidance, helping the boys see that disagreements were normal, but respect and understanding were essential. "Listen," the billionaire said one afternoon, gathering the boys together. "We all have different ways of doing things. That's okay. But if we want to live and grow together, we have to learn to listen and compromise." At first, the boys rolled their eyes, but slowly, they started to apply the advice. They began negotiating who used the music room and art supplies first, and even learned to help each other instead of arguing. Evenings were a time of bonding. The billionaire often invited the boys to the dining room for informal talks. They didn't speak about rules or lessons, they shared stories. The billionaire spoke about their own childhood struggles, about moments of fear, failure, and doubt. The boys, in turn, shared memories of their old neighborhoods, their families, and small dreams they had almost forgotten. It was in these conversations that a deep trust began to form. For the first time, the boys felt someone truly wanted to know them, to understand them. One particular evening, the mischievous boy opened up about feeling like he always had to fight for attention, like he would never be noticed for who he was. The quiet boy spoke about feeling invisible, overlooked, and small. The artistic boy shared how he worried his talents didn't matter, and the curious boy admitted he often felt afraid of trying new things. Even the athletic boy, who had always been confident in sports, revealed a fear of not being good enough. The billionaire listened, nodding and encouraging them, never judging, only offering reassurance and guidance. The next day, the billionaire introduced a small project that would bring the boys together in a way they had not experienced before. They asked the boys to plan a small community event, something that would help others while teaching teamwork. The boys were unsure at first. How could they do something so big? But the billionaire reminded them that they could take small steps and work together. They spent hours planning, each boy contributing ideas. The quiet boy suggested writing invitations. The mischievous boy came up with creative games. The artistic boy designed posters. The curious boy researched materials. And the athletic boy organized physical activities. Slowly, the group began to function like a team, relying on each other's strengths. It was the first time the boys saw that collaboration could be powerful, and that they each had something valuable to offer. When the event finally took place, it was a small success, but a success nonetheless. Neighbors, friends, and even some local children attended, enjoying the games, activities, and the boys' enthusiasm. The boys beamed with pride, realizing that they had created something positive, that they had contributed in a meaningful way. The billionaire watched from the side, heart swelling with pride. It wasn't about recognition, it was about growth, responsibility, and self-confidence. Outside the mansion, the boys started to see the world differently. They noticed opportunities where they had only seen obstacles. They began to dream more boldly, imagining futures that seemed impossible just weeks before. Each boy discovered strengths they hadn't known they possessed: leadership, creativity, problem-solving, and empathy. They learned that even small actions could have a big impact, and that believing in oneself was the first step to change. There were still setbacks, of course. Sometimes one boy would struggle with a task or disagreements would flare up. Sometimes memories of past struggles would creep in, bringing fear and doubt. But each time the billionaire guided them, helping them see that mistakes were not failures, that persistence mattered more than perfection. Slowly, the boys began to internalize these lessons, applying them without being told, supporting each other instead of competing. One afternoon, the boys asked the billionaire if they could visit a nearby park for a picnic. It was simple, but it meant the world to them. The billionaire agreed, and they spent the day playing games, exploring the area, and sharing stories with people in the neighborhood. The boys laughed freely without fear, and for the first time in years they felt a true sense of normalcy. It wasn't about wealth or grandeur, it was about connection, freedom, and belonging. By the end of part 3, the boys had begun to see the billionaire not just as someone who offered them shelter, but as a mentor, a guide, and even a parental figure in many ways. They trusted them, respected them, and most importantly, believed that someone cared for them unconditionally. The mansion was no longer just a house. It was a space of growth, hope, and transformation. Even the community outside started to notice the change. The boys, once reserved and cautious, were now confident, polite, and engaged. Neighbors who had once been skeptical were inspired by their courage and determination. The media, still watching from a distance, began to shift its narrative, noting not just the billionaire's generosity, but the remarkable transformation of the boys themselves. And yet the journey was far from over. The boys had taken their first steps into a new world, but there were many lessons ahead, many challenges to face, and much more growth to achieve. What had begun as an act of kindness was slowly turning into something much deeper, a life-changing journey for all involved. Inside the mansion, laughter, creativity, and conversation filled the rooms. The boys had begun to see that life could be different. that they could be more than their past and that a single act of kindness could ignite change beyond imagination. And the billionaire, sitting quietly in the corner one evening, watched them with a sense of hope and pride, knowing that this was only the beginning of something extraordinary. By the time the fourth week arrived, the boys had begun to settle into a rhythm in the mansion. They were no longer just guests or visitors. They were beginning to feel a sense of ownership, as if the house belonged to them as much as it did to the billionaire. Every morning they woke up with a little more confidence, a little more curiosity about the world, and a little more hope that life could be different. The billionaire had noticed subtle changes in each of them. The quiet boy, once hesitant and reserved, now spoke more freely, sharing ideas and even giving suggestions during group activities. The mischievous boy, who had always relied on humor to hide insecurities, had begun to show moments of focus and thoughtfulness. The artistic boy, who had spent much of his life doubting his talent, now painted with bold colors and growing confidence. The curious boy eagerly explored science experiments and books. And the athletic boy not only excelled in physical activities, but also began to lead and encourage the others. One morning, the billionaire decided it was time to challenge the boys further. They gathered them in the study, where a map of the city was spread out on the table. "I want you to choose a project," the billionaire said. "Something that will help others. Something that will show you what you're capable of." The boys looked at each other, excitement and hesitation mixed in their eyes. They had grown in confidence, but the idea of responsibility was still new and a little intimidating. After some discussion, they decided to organize a small charity event for children in their old neighborhoods. It would involve games, food, and a place where kids could feel safe and have fun for a day. The boys divided the work among themselves. The quiet boy took on writing invitations and coordinating schedules. The mischievous boy handled entertainment and games. The artistic boy created posters and decorations. The curious boy researched supplies and safety measures, and the athletic boy organized sports activities. The billionaire watched them work together, quietly stepping in only to guide when necessary. It was a turning point. For the first time, the boys were taking initiative, making decisions, and managing responsibilities without hesitation. The house was alive with energy and purpose, and even the staff who worked in the mansion noticed the remarkable change in the boys' attitudes and confidence. Planning the event wasn't without challenges. Supplies were delayed, disagreements arose over tasks, and some ideas didn't work as expected. There were moments of frustration, when the mischievous boy and the quiet boy argued about who should lead a particular activity, or when the artistic boy wanted everything to be perfect and others preferred a simpler approach. But each time they learned to listen, compromise, and support one another. The billionaire gently reminded them, "Mistakes aren't failures, they're lessons. You're learning more about yourselves and each other every step of the way." When the day of the event arrived, the boys were nervous but excited. They arrived early, setting up tables, decorations, and games. Slowly, children from their old neighborhoods began to arrive. Some shy, some energetic, all curious about the new experience. The boys greeted them with smiles and laughter, guiding them through activities and games. There was a sense of pride in their eyes. They were creating something meaningful, something that could bring joy to others. The event went better than anyone had expected. Children laughed, ran around, and played games, and parents expressed gratitude for the opportunity. The boys moved from activity to activity, helping wherever needed, encouraging participation, and making sure everyone was included. Even small moments like helping a child tie a shoelace or cheering for a game winner carried significance. The boys realized that their actions mattered, that they could create positive change, and that they had the ability to inspire others. By the afternoon, exhaustion mixed with happiness. The boys gathered under a large tree, sharing a simple meal provided for the event. They laughed about mistakes that had happened during the day, talked about what went well, and even began to dream about bigger projects they could do in the future. The billionaire joined them, quietly listening and occasionally offering advice. "You've all done something amazing today," they said. "Not because of what you built, but because of who you are and how you work together." After the event, the mansion felt different. The boys walked through the rooms, noticing small things they hadn't before. The quiet beauty of the library, the comfort of the bedrooms, the way sunlight hit the sunroom at certain times of day. They had begun to appreciate not only the luxury of the mansion, but also the opportunities it offered. They could learn, create, play, and grow, and most importantly, they felt a sense of belonging. The billionaire continued to guide them, introducing more opportunities for growth. They suggested internships, mentoring sessions with professionals in areas the boys were interested in, and even trips to museums, science centers, and art galleries. Each activity was designed not just to entertain but to teach responsibility, creativity, and problem-solving. Slowly, the boys started to see a future for themselves beyond the limitations of their old neighborhoods. There were still challenges. The boys struggled with self-doubt, worry, and the occasional fear of failure. The quiet boy sometimes wondered if his voice truly mattered. The mischievous boy questioned whether he could ever be serious without making mistakes. The artistic boy worried that his work wasn't good enough. The curious boy sometimes felt overwhelmed by the amount of knowledge to explore. The athletic boy feared letting the group down. But each time, the billionaire reminded them that growth wasn't linear and that courage came from trying, not from being perfect. One evening, after a long day of activities, the boys sat together in the sunroom, reflecting on their journey. "I never thought I could do anything like today," said the quiet boy, his voice soft but filled with pride. "I didn't know I could help others in such a real way." The mischievous boy added, "I laughed a lot, but I also felt important, like I mattered." The artistic boy smiled, holding a small sketchbook. "I never thought anyone would care about what I make, but today people liked it." The curious boy chimed in, "I learned things I never knew before, and I helped other kids. It felt good." The athletic boy, usually full of energy, nodded quietly. "I felt strong, not just in games, but in helping and leading too." The billionaire listened, heart full. They realized that the boys had grown not just in skills and confidence, but in understanding themselves and each other. They had learned empathy, responsibility, and the power of teamwork. They were beginning to believe that they could achieve more than they had ever imagined, and that their past struggles didn't define their future. By the end of part 4, it was clear that the boys had transformed in ways that went beyond appearances or skills. They had learned to trust, to work together, and to believe in their potential. The mansion had become a space of growth, learning, and connection. The boys were no longer merely surviving. They were thriving. Outside the mansion, people began to take notice. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers were inspired by the changes they saw in the boys. The media, once skeptical, started highlighting their achievements, noting that the boys were learning important life lessons, showing leadership, and contributing positively to their communities. The billionaire remained humble, emphasizing that the boys' courage and determination were the real story. And yet, the journey was not over. There were more lessons to learn, more challenges to face, and more opportunities to grow. But the foundation had been laid. The boys had discovered that kindness, guidance, and belief in their potential could change lives. They had learned that they could dream bigger, reach higher, and create opportunities not just for themselves, but for others around them. The mansion echoed with laughter, conversation, and the sound of activity. The boys were confident, creative, and united. The billionaire watched quietly, knowing that what had started as a simple act of care had blossomed into something far more meaningful. Life was changing for the boys in ways that could not have been imagined, and the days ahead promised even greater transformation, opportunity, and hope. The weeks had turned into months, and the boys had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. What had begun as hesitation, fear, and doubt had blossomed into confidence, creativity, and determination. The mansion was no longer just a house of wealth. It had become a home filled with laughter, learning, and possibility. The boys moved through it with purpose, exploring new interests, helping each other, and discovering talents they had never realized they had. One morning, the billionaire gathered them together in the sunroom. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, highlighting the excitement in the boys' eyes. "I think it's time for you to take the next step," the billionaire said. "You've grown so much, and now it's time to show the world what you can do." The boys exchanged nervous glances. They had grown comfortable with the mansion, with the routines, and with the billionaire's guidance, but stepping out into the world still felt overwhelming. The billionaire explained that they wanted the boys to lead a bigger project, one that would not only help others but also demonstrate the skills, confidence, and teamwork they had developed. The boys would organize a large community event, open to children and families from many neighborhoods. They would plan activities, games, educational workshops, and even a small talent show. The responsibility was huge, but the boys felt ready. The lessons they had learned, the patience, the collaboration, the empathy, had prepared them for this moment. Planning the event took weeks of careful preparation. The boys divided tasks based on their strengths. The quiet boy took charge of logistics, making sure schedules and materials were organized. The mischievous boy designed games and entertainment, bringing his energy and humor to every activity. The artistic boy handled all the decorations and visual elements, creating posters, banners, and art stations. The curious boy researched educational activities and safety measures, ensuring everything ran smoothly. The athletic boy organized sports and team challenges, teaching children how to work together. The billionaire remained a guide, not a manager. They offered advice, shared their experiences, and encouraged the boys to make decisions on their own. When disagreements arose, the billionaire stepped back, allowing the boys to resolve conflicts and negotiate solutions themselves. Slowly, they realized that leadership wasn't about giving orders. It was about listening, considering ideas, and working together toward a common goal. The day of the event arrived, bright and sunny. The boys arrived early, full of nervous energy. They moved quickly, setting up tables, arranging games, and welcoming the first children who arrived. Parents watched, impressed by the boys' confidence and organization. The quiet boy greeted families politely, explaining the schedule and answering questions. The mischievous boy entertained the children with games and laughter. The artistic boy helped kids paint and create crafts, while the curious boy supervised experiments and educational activities. The athletic boy led races and teamwork challenges, encouraging everyone to participate. The event was a success beyond anyone's expectations. Children laughed, learned, and played, while parents expressed gratitude for the opportunity. The boys moved through the crowd, helping, encouraging, and celebrating every small success. They realized that their actions had an impact, that their leadership mattered, and that they could inspire others through their courage and dedication. As the day came to an end, the billionaire gathered the boys together. "Look at what you've accomplished," they said, voice full of pride. "This is more than an event. This is a demonstration of your growth, your teamwork, and your ability to make a difference. You've shown the world and yourselves what you are capable of." The boys looked at each other, smiles spreading across their faces. For the first time, they truly believed it. They had done something meaningful, something that mattered. The success of the event was noticed by the community and local media. Stories highlighted not only the billionaire's generosity, but also the remarkable transformation of the boys themselves. People were inspired by how 5 young boys from difficult circumstances had grown into confident, compassionate, and capable individuals. They were no longer defined by their past struggles. They were defined by their actions, their growth, and their ability to lead. Back at the mansion, the boys reflected on how far they had come. The quiet boy, once hesitant and reserved, now spoke openly about his dreams and ambitions. The mischievous boy, once focused only on humor, had learned to use his energy for leadership.